Okay, so let's have this conversation because I'm drunk enough to have it, and it's been burning a hole in my soul for a while. And I don't think I'll ever have like a proper manifesto, um, in which to really like unveil these ideas. Who knows? Maybe I will. That'd be great. There are three things to worry about, at least in my mind. So one is the planet, which more broadly is the environment. And that is whether it's climate change, whether it is nuclear war, whether it is future pandemics, whatever the case may be. Um, yeah, just the general fragility of the environment in which we live and the way that we operate within it. Um, I don't have a good solution for any of this. It doesn't particularly intersect with my skill set. So I'm going to leave that alone. It does look to me like, as far as what I've been able to discern, that the best way that you can have an impact on the future of the planet is um, through proper altruism, through just donating to relevant charities. That actually, if you ever feel like doing this, it'll be fun. Used to be, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but certainly my parents used to yell at me, turn the lights off when you're done down in the basement or whatever the case may be. Because they were 100-watt bulbs and they would stay on, they would burn, overnight. The amount of power that it takes to charge your phone is minuscule. You're talking a couple of pennies a year to keep this thing that has replaced everything powered. So that's pretty incredible. It also means that let's maybe we'll buy a solar panel and just put it in the window, right? We'll just use that to charge our phones. Then we're doing our part. No, not really. And so it seems to me like there are a couple things that we can do that are actually meaningful, move the needle. One is giving to charities that that are making this a priority and that are able to handle this more effectively. Two is just generally speaking, trying to make our energy and material consumption a bit more fungible. That is, if there is some way that you can move from buying physical objects to buying digital objects, then that's great, because then effectively you're taking a bunch of problems of how do we get all of these things and make them sustainable into one problem. Is how do we create a bunch of watts in a sustainable way. It's not to say that people are going to come up with good solutions to those, but at least it's reducing the number of problems that need to be solved. It's not like, oh crap, how do we make energy renewable and also make ceramic cats renewable? It's just the one problem. So play video games and you're doing your part for the environment. I don't know. Don't trust me. I don't know what I'm talking about, particularly in this area. Second problem is information, because I don't care what your beliefs are. I think no matter what they are, you're going to look around at, and obviously I'm looking at this from a U.S. lens, you're going to look around and say, oh boy, at least 20% of people are completely insane, and that's weird. And I think we have a responsibility. Well, let me give you my prior first. Is that I operate under the assumption that people are inherently good and worthwhile, and that they can be corrupted by a million different things. That's a fundamental belief that I need to believe. I don't really believe in evil people. I don't believe in stupid people. I don't think it's helpful to go through life with that as an attitude of just being able to write certain people off as, well, of course they're just idiots. It's fine. So then the question becomes, okay, how do people end up believing weird things? And it's interesting because this is one where there's a significant amount of change happening right now, and that we're moving from an ad-supported business model for a lot of information to a direct subscriber-supported business model. And in one sense, this seems very good, because the ad incentives are just awful. They encourage the viral meme, the 13 things that blah, number 7 will shock you, the self-righteousness, the indignation, the most extreme version of the story, It's a terrible incentive. But I'm not convinced that direct subscriptions are going to do better. And it's interesting because I feel like the direct subscriptions would be a better model in a prior time. So to some extent, if you look at newspapers, they're supported by advertisements in terms of the classifieds, and then they were also supported by you paying for the paper. Um, and so the incentives there were mixed. Um, but I think there was a perception, I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. I think there's an idea that you can have something be a lost leader in order to tell people what you really feel they need to know, and that there's an idea that as journalists you have a responsibility to yes, make money and seek profitability, but do that in service of providing cover for the people who are going to spend a year embedded in some crazy cult so that they can write the long essay about it that gets published once. That sort of stuff is hard to sustain now. And I worry that when we move to a subscriber model, if we're operating in an environment where, take the New York Times as an example. I think that the New York Times, you're moving from an incentive to say, hey, you print the stuff that gets the most eyeballs and tweets about it, to a print the stuff that ensures that people are going to re-up their subscription. And depending on who your subscribers are, that can be a corrupting influence as well. And I think we have done such a great job of polarizing the general populace that the people who are gung-ho to subscribe for the New York Times have a particular agenda. The people who are gung-ho to subscribe to conservative media have a particular agenda. And so the incentive is going to be, how do we keep dog-fooding the same information? And so the threat of audience capture, I think, is very real and very significant, and worrisome. I don't know that this is going to solve our problems. And to be honest, I think if you say, all right, we're moving from telling people what Samsung wants them to hear to telling people what they already believe, that almost seems worse to me. Certainly, just from the perspective of having a shared sense of reality, which I think is the terrifying thing that we've been missing. So, okay, those are two big things to worry about. I don't have great solutions for either of those. I don't know what the right solution is for media and general information. Although it is interesting to note that there are certain things that run sort of counter-narrative. One is the internet itself. The other that comes to mind is Wikipedia, as being a group that to a certain extent has been able to resist ideological capture. Now, it's hard to know because, maybe if I was a fundamentalist Islamist or a member of the CCP or whatever, then I'd have a very different view of Wikipedia, and it could just be that I happen to be on the right lens of whatever it is, and so to me they seem relatively stable. But the rules of the internet seem to be such that everyone has access and everyone has equal reach. That is something that's corrupted by social media and is corrupted by search. But if you were to take search out of the equation, and if you were to take social media out of the equation, you do not have these algorithms spinning information in a certain way, and so the idea is I'm just as likely to stumble upon your Star Wars fan fiction page as someone else's. I have to channel 8-year-old me who is discovering the internet for the first time. And I think for those of us who are old enough to remember the good old days of the internet, it was a very different place, and that information was less curated, and it is not the case that the environment itself shows favoritism. It is the case that the curation process is what imposes that favoritism and that potential for perverse incentives. Wikipedia, I think, is a good example of what the internet was. I'm sure there are plenty of examples where there are enough people with a particular ideology that have more time, and so they're able to make sure that their edits persist and yada yada. But it's what we've got. So that's information. The third thing is, what do we do with people? And this is one where I think my perspective is very different when I think about my own life versus my son's life. And I wonder to what extent it resonates with people who don't have kids or don't have a tangible investment in the future after they're gone. Which is not to diminish people, whatever. There are some crazy incentives in the digital space to capture people and repurpose them for particular interests, as we've already sort of hinted at. And I look at my son and I say, oh shoot, he's spending too much time on his iPad. And I can go, okay, well, I can do the responsible technologist thing and say, hey, no iPads allowed. No technology allowed. You can have a smartphone when you're 35. Go out and play, go out and make friends in the real world. The problem, though, is there's a collective action issue there. Even if everyone else happened to have the same perspective as me about what degree technology should play a role in our lives, they assume that other people don't, whatever. So I can't say, hey, no internet for you, because it's effectively saying you are isolated from everyone else your age. So there's a question of how do we pull back and say, okay, let's buy some farmland and isolate ourselves from the world, or do we figure out a way to make the internet less toxic? And I will say, just by as a bit of a tangent, I'm very happy that my son is my son, and that it seems like the biggest risk to him from technology and the current digital environment is that he will end up smoking too much pot and playing too many video games. Whereas for women, it seems like there is more of a risk of spending time on Instagram and really suffering some severe social trauma. So it's weird in that things seem to be different across genders, and of course this is me worrying about stuff that's in the future, but neither situation is good, but I think one is easier to claw your way back from. So the question then on my mind is, if we assume that there is no way to say, log off, go out and play with your friends because they're all online as well, then it's incumbent upon ourselves to make the digital environment one that is not actively hostile toward humans. And it's weird because you would assume that would be a basic assumption for adults too, that we should demand that our phones be operating in our best interests. We don't, and maybe that speaks to our own self-esteem, but okay, whatever. We should at least insist that they operate in our children's best interests. So what does that look like? I think there is, there are perverse incentive problems that we've talked about. If you look at companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon and Twitter and everybody else, there's the whole, we need to operate in the best interest of shareholder value, yada yada. And fine, that's a cover for doing any number of things. But fundamentally, this isn't the structure of the internet. This is something that's been superimposed on top of it. And the question in my mind is, do we have the opportunity to redefine what that contract looks like? Is there ever a point removed from... because the internet itself is fairly resistant to that. Information is distributed, and we have things fairly decentralized. There is no concept of you have a web page that only renders through the Facebook browser. It almost happened. It almost happened with Internet Explorer. There are still risks with the centralization of DNS, although I think there'd be a backlash if that was considered to be captured. But we have this idea of, okay, we're going to establish some standards that we all agree on, and then everyone can play in this shared space. How do we create a shared space that is resistant to capture? And this is the thing that's been kind of animating me recently. And I look at VR as kind of being the next frontier. Not because I think that VR has performed particularly well. I have an Oculus, I play around with it. I've been fairly disappointed with it, if I can be candid. I think especially in a time of a pandemic, boy, if there were ever an incentive to create real telepresence, that would have been it. The idea that Zoom is our solution, that webinars are our solution for isolation in 2020 is laughable and ridiculous. It reeks of a missed opportunity, and to me, it just says, okay, there's nobody playing seriously in this space. There should have been a thing that just took off and was like, oh, well, now we all moved into the metaverse. Hooray for us. But okay, looking at it through another lens, it just means we have more time to come up with a better version of this, which is great. So I don't look at VR as with particular optimism, but I do look at VR as somewhat of an inevitability because it allows, one, the democratization of resources, and the elimination of scarcity to the extent that we can provide that. And then two, just based on harm reduction. If we are all interacting with people intermediated through the space, then we have, I can't put you in the face if I'm interacting with you in a digital world. We have the ability to police that in a different way. So, I don't know if this is true or not, but let's assume that VR or some other technology becomes the next internet. Well, this actually affords us of a cool opportunity. And that opportunity is that we have a chance so there are two ways that a move to a virtual environment could go. One is that, Facebook or Amazon or somebody else says, here's this virtual world, everybody log into our system, and then it's up to the CEO of that system to govern responsibly in perpetuity for the rest of time. And it doesn't look like there's much historical precedent for people governing responsibly for the rest of time. The benevolent dictator trope doesn't seem to be particularly effective. The other possibility is that we end up with something like an open standard, where everybody accommodates the standard, and the switching costs for moving off of that standard are so expensive that no one can create a rival private version of the thing. So there's no private internet right now. It's not like, all right, well, let's log into the Apple internet to see the Apple pages. The switching costs are too expensive, so people don't. And so then Apple is forced to accommodate the standards that are imposed by a cabal of people. So let's assume that that VR is an opportunity for us to impose a new set of rules. What this really means is that we have an opportunity especially to the extent that this is an immersive environment, we have an opportunity to define the fundamental economics and physics of the world which most people will eventually inhabit. And that means that we could impose something like an enforcement of the Dunbar number. The Dunbar number being the number of people that you can have, that you can sort of maintain social relationships with before it becomes just too expensive to track. Like, oh, John stole apples, I don't trust John. Um, so let me propose something. So let's imagine that in this virtual environment, let's imagine that this is standard. Let's imagine that crypto has something to do with it, probably. So there's some proof of life concept, and so just by being a person, you have access to some plot of land in this virtual environment. Obviously, translate to this to whatever you want to imagine the virtual world to look like. Maybe it's a planet. I don't know. You then have access to your environment. And your environment will generate resources at some particular rate. If you wanted to make this concrete, you could even say, look, the simulation is going to provide a certain number of voxels, voxels being sort of 3D pixels. And you generate a certain number of voxels in your world just by existing. And to the extent that you provide value to other people, to the extent that they visit your server or upvote your server or otherwise support it, your server generates more voxels. So if I provide, if I want to create my own virtual environment for just me and my family, that's great. Hooray for me. If I want to create something, going back to Star Wars fan fiction, if I want to create the Star Wars fan club server and invite a whole bunch of people in, then great. I'm providing value and happiness and well-being to the people who visit, and so I generate more resources as a result. So far, so good. And of course, we could intermediate that with blockchain-y stuff. Now, the problem is that even so far we're talking about the internet. That you get a certain number of incoming links based on how much value you're providing to people, and hooray for you. And then that gets perverted by this top layer of, suddenly Google starts sending you a bunch of traffic, or social media starts curating information, and they have perverse incentives for what they're surfacing or not. So we could correct for this. We could say that as soon as you start to attract more than 1,000 people to your server, suddenly your resource generation stops, or it severely declines. So you have this perverse incentive to not become too big. That your goal is to provide some niche information to people, and to the extent that you cannot support a wide audience, to actually train other people, and let them own their own environments. You say, hey, I love the Star Wars fan club, but more people are interested than I am. So I'm going to take the two most rabid fan people and say, hey, you should start your own systems, and spin up your own servers and distribute stuff that way. I don't know if that'd work. I don't know what the right models are to explore that idea. But we have the opportunity to say, all right, to the extent that natural monopolies are a thing that exist in the real world, which to me at least it seems to be the case. I'd love to talk to someone who can convince me otherwise, but I sit here and complain about certainly in the U.S., we complain about our internet provider, but it's they all have exclusivity contracts with the local governments, and so for some other company to come in and lay cable is prohibitively expensive or just straight up illegal, and so your internet provider can charge however much they want because they don't have to compete with anybody. So hooray for them. It does seem like there is a first mover advantage in a lot of these areas, and natural monopolies are a thing. Now, if you want to fight me on that, I honestly, I'd love to be convinced that that's wrong, and that naturally the physics of the real world tend toward democratization of opportunity, but I just don't see it right now. If we move to a digital world and we have the opportunity to define the specifications of that world, this is the time to really consider what are the ways that we impose a value system on that world. And I think it's worth calling out. This is an imposition on that world. We would be, in that scenario, dictating to future generations that, like, hey, 1,000 people is exactly the number of people on your server, after which there's a plummeting decline. So we are imposing our value structure on future generations. And then there's a question of how do we get to a place where we can have this imposition such that it is resistant to capture, but also open to change. How do we create something that is so if because the problem is okay, we'll say, all right, well, majority rule of people can change the rules of the underlying metaverse rule set. Great, but how do you make sure that Facebook isn't paying off 51% of people to vote a certain way? How do you avoid political machines? How do you avoid any of this stuff? I don't know. There's a lot of game theory here. There's a lot of economics here. Maybe the answer is you can't. Maybe the answer is that the benevolent dictator system is the right system, and that the way that you prevent it from being corrupted is you impose the dictatorship and then codify the rules such that even upon your death, those rules stay in place, and that they're fundamentally inalterable. I don't know. It seems pretty totalitarian and scary to me to say, like, hey, let's define the way that the Matrix works for the future subjects of the Matrix. But at the same time, we're also living under the tyranny of real world physics. We are no more free to change the the gravitational constant. As much as we might want to, or find some benefit in doing that. So it's something that, I'm putting a lot of thought into. And I don't know. I just wanted to sort of talk this through. If this was interesting to you, then great. If this was not interesting to you, I fully understand. I hope you're doing well. I'd love to know your general thoughts on this sort of thing. It's very easy to be cynical about where we're at. Say, all right, well, we just need to give up smartphones, or we need to do whatever. We need to figure out how to break free from that and say, look, we've released the genie from the bottle, but now we have the opportunity to leverage it, and what is the best way we can possibly do that. So, that's what I've been thinking about. All right, bye.